So I started off at Fort Bragg, like you mentioned, and I was a lieutenant, pretty new in the Army, and I just was always fascinated with entrepreneurship in general, and I wanted to figure something out. I was like, hey, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad like a lot of investors do, and I had that epiphany moment. And with that epiphany moment, I knew that there was something along those lines I had to figure out while I was at Fort Bragg, brand new lieutenant. So I worked with Buddy Rushing originally with his White Feather Accelerator, and I learned enough just to be dangerous. And so with that knowledge, I applied it in Fayetteville. It's where I first started real estate investing. And I set a goal like, hey, I'm just going to try to buy one property this year. And that very first year, I actually ended up buying, I think, like 10. So, yeah, learned enough to be
Wow.
dangerous. And I always say,
10x your goal.
yeah, 10x it.
Grant Cardone would be proud.
So I always say, hey, the education is absolutely important, but I think what's even more important is the application. So you got to take what you learn and immediately apply it to the streets and actually try to reach some of those financial freedom goals or your real estate goals. So that's exactly how I got started, right there, just as a lieutenant,
Wow.
looking for something to do as a side hustle.
So was that like right after grad? Like what year was that?
I bought my very first property on April Fool's Day, 2020, and I just had gotten back from a deployment, so I had a lot of time overseas. I think I was stuck at Camp Buring in Kuwait, if anyone's ever been there. I was stuck there for a long time, and while I was there, I was like, hey, I might as well get better. And so I studied as much as I could about real estate while I was over there, and as soon as I got back, closed on my very first property.
Yeah, that's awesome. A huge lesson in that too for people who are in the military who are listening to this. I think a lot of people who aren't in the military picture it as like you deploy and you're just fighting, sleeping, or eating, and that's not the case in a lot of situations. It's a lot of hurry up and wait. And so, if you're in the military listening to this, man, take advantage of that time. You can have like a full college education in the downtime between all the military activities that you got to do, especially when you're deployed and can't do anything else. So
Absolutely.
that's awesome. So 2020. So when did you join the White Feather Accelerator?
Like that January of
Okay.
2020. So January, I learned the very first things I ever learned about real estate, and then by April, I was buying my first property.
Wow. And so that year, over the next year, you bought 10 properties.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Okay. So what did those? And I know lieutenants aren't known for making like a massive amount of money. So what did those first deals look like? How did you pull those off, and what type of deals were they?
So my very, very first deal was a very simple one. It was just a VA loan, zero down. But what I did was I negotiated for the seller to cover all those closing costs. And so I came in, I actually had like a check for $200 to move in this property and immediately had a guy ready to move into the third bedroom. And that I bought it for like 95 grand because you can, back then especially you can get really cheap properties in Fayetteville, North Carolina. So it was like 95 grand. The mortgage was probably $550, and that bedroom rented for $600 a month. So from day one, I had that tenant moved into that third bedroom, and I to this day I haven't paid a single dime into that mortgage because I've always had a roommate or a tenant in there. So that was kind of
Wow.
a cool deal, but it's nothing sexy. It was a very simple deal, just purchased with an agent off the MLS, and that's a perfect example of what anybody in the service can do with their VA loan.
Yeah.
Um, and then after that, I bought. I kind of quickly realized, hey, like you said, lieutenants do not make a lot of money. And as a new grad, I definitely didn't have any savings. I had a Cal loan, which is actually what funded my first Burr deal. But I knew, hey, I can't buy turnkey properties because I can't sink in a 20% down payment because my whole money momentum would just be done just like that. So if I wanted to
Can
scale,
you sorry? Can you explain what a cow loan is too before we go on?
oh,
Because
that's
people are
right.
going to be looking that up. And
Yeah, so it's definitely a slang word, but it's like a career. What it is, it's a career starter loan that they give out at the service academies, and it actually has, fantastic rates. So I had about $36,000. It was like a 0.75 interest rate.
wow.
So yeah, and I'm sure they give out something very similar to whoever's graduating out of there now. Um,
Yeah.
but that's what I had. I had it, and a lot of it was in, like whatever they sell you from USA, like whatever mutual funds were in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I had. It was just sitting in there, and I just knew, hey, I just simply cannot buy turnkey properties. I can buy one, but then all my money's gone. So I kind of learned about BRRRR strategy and other creative finance strategies like subject to, seller financing, and those are my kind of main weapons I use to close deals. So my second deal right after that was a BRRRR. I bought it from a courthouse auction actually, won the bid, was able to extend the closing deadline to get a hard money loan in there, renovated the property, then refinanced it, was able to pull out 75% loan to value, and recycled all my cash. And
Wow.
that was a big click moment for me because I had a 25% equity position in the property, cash flowing like $500-600 a month, and I had my 30. I think I put in like 32 or $35,000 as my down payment. So I threw my whole cal loan into that, hoping that
Yeah.
this would work out. That was my whole savings. I threw it in there, but I got it all back on the back end once I hit that refi. So that was just a
Wow.
huge moment for me, and I did that many more times in Fayetteville.
Yeah. So that was in Fayetteville. How'd you learn how to do a sheriff's sale? I mean, that's typically not somebody's second deal.
Kind of you kind of just figured it out. So I kind of learned from going to investor meetups how they worked, and there was a realty group that kind of specialized in doing some of those auctions there. So I plugged in with them and I figured out how they did it. Because Fayetteville is a little old school. You have to go in person down to the county courthouse and actually submit bids, and then go in there every now and then to check on your bids and see how they're doing. So
Hmm.
we kind of just figured it out by, again, just going out there and trying.
Yeah. And how'd you pick this deal? Were you able to actually walk through it, or you were just like, it, you know, it looks like it could work, hopefully.
So technically, I mean, the property's vacant,
Okay.
and there's really no way to get in the property, but uh, we'll just say I found a way to get in there
Yeah.
and walk it.
Can be resourceful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
use my lieutenant resourcefulness to get in there. So
Yeah. Nice. Nice. Okay. So you did that one. How long did that take?
I think the renovation took probably like somewhere between, I think it was around like 2.5 months.
Okay. Yeah. And you didn't do any of that work yourself. You hired that out?
Yep, I've actually
Okay.
never done any of my own work. I've always hired out from day one, just because I knew, hey, I was already a full-time, Army officer. If I try to go in there, and plus I'm not, I'm not a handyman who knows what kind of shoddy work I would have put in my own property. So from day
Yeah.
one, I've always just outsourced that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know everyone has different opinions on this point, but I think it's really important to pay attention to this because I've interviewed a lot of people who are really successful, and it's funny because like the people who I work with who do short-term rentals, some of the ones that are the most successful are the ones that do it remote because it forces them to be so
Oh yeah.
hands off. And in all that extra time when they're not driving to the property and they're not, managing the work themselves and they're not doing all these, cleaning the property or whatever, they're finding another deal. It sounds like that's what you were able to do. Did you wait till that one was totally finished to start the next one then, or did you just jump right into another one?
So that first one, I did wait until I finished it, had my proof of concept, and
Yeah,
then once I had the proof of concept, then I started doing multiple ones kind of running simultaneously.
I see. Okay. And was the courthouse the main way you were finding them, or all different ways?
All different ways, but I did focus on off-market lead generation. So
Okay.
my specialty, I would say, was actually just door knocking. I'd walk
Mm,
my dog and I would door knock neighborhoods and
really?
yeah, and negotiate for deals. That's how I found like 3 or 4 sub two deals. Actually, it was just simply door knocking.
Wow. And what was your target when you knock on doors?
I would look for properties that may have some signs of distress or looks like, hey, this might be a rental property. But if it looked like a rental, I'd probably cold call. But if it looked like it maybe needed a little bit of love or just like an update, I'd probably be knocking on their door. Or I'd maybe look in the tax records and see if they have like a high equity position.
Yeah, you got it. Okay. Yeah, and it's it's funny because I've found that people who are willing to do the things that most people won't are the ones that get the best results. And I go back, like, I think that's an awesome strategy to start with. And first thing people say, oh, that's not scalable. And, that's not you could do things online. You can, there's all kinds of other ways that are probably more efficient. But if you're just getting started, it's such a great way to just meet people face to face and find deals. My wife used to drive me around and we'd put up bandit signs on a Friday night.
Oh, yeah.
And that was our date night, and that was how we started. And the cost of marketing was so cheap, and all the leads were the exact right type of leads. It was people who didn't want to sell on the MLS because it was a hoarder house or whatever their reason was. And those were the people we could help. So, it worked great in the beginning, and then you can move into more scalable methods after that. So that is awesome. So when did you decide that you were going to pursue financial freedom by the time you left the military, which was a pretty short period of time? And I guess what made you feel confident that that was possible?
Yeah, and a quick note too on what I just want to make a little note on what you said about doing that cheap marketing. I think that's definitely part of my story, and probably part of yours and part of our success, because you have to be willing to kind of get in the trenches. I think the number one excuse I hear from people is why they didn't get started was I don't have any money. So same thing. I was a I was a broke lieutenant. I didn't have any money, but I was willing to hustle a little bit to find those deals. So it's a fantastic point that you made. Now, of course, everything's outsourced. I pay for all my advertisements, so now I have a system. But to start, I would just highly recommend doing something like that: bandit signs, door knocking, whatever you can, just to get out there. And pursuing financial freedom, just to answer that question too.
Yeah.
Once I had a good system going, I had probably a dozen rentals or so. I just knew I had a knack for it. Like, this is something that's actually achievable. This is something that's a very realistic goal for me, that I can actually achieve financial freedom, which before was just a dream. And I always had a vision board, what my dream would look like, what my ideal day or morning routine would look like, but it was just a dream. But with a little bit of success, I just knew, like, hey, this is actually something I can turn into reality. So I kind of put all my chips on the table, decided to go really all in on it, and it was it was almost like kind of competing with the Army at some point, like, with my time, because it got so busy doing everything. So probably after that first year, I would say, hey, this is what I'm going to be doing full time. And so I worked pretty hard while I was in the Army to build up my business and what it is now and our portfolio, so that by the end of my contract with the Army, my 5-year contract I had, my obligation, it's like, I'm going to be getting out and I'm going to be doing real estate full time. I'm not going to go get a job. I'm not going to go work somewhere in a corporate structure. I'm just going to do real estate investing full time. And that was my dream. And so we were able to make it happen.
Nice. And what were you targeting when you were doing that then? What were, like, the metrics that you were like, okay, if it meets this much cash flow or cash on cash return or whatever, then it's a deal for me?
For me, the main components I was looking for was, I wanted to get in the deal with little or no money to reserve as much capital as I could, since we never had a ton of huge capital reserves. And before it was like, I need to make $400 or $500 a month net cash flow. I kind of decreased that, especially with the burrs, with the interest rates, had to drop it down a little bit, because there's just even in like a cheap market like Fayetteville, I just couldn't receive those margins anymore. So I kind of had to adjust that a little bit. But as long as I can get most of my cash back out or get in the deal with very little, and I can cash flow, I would probably take it on.
Got it. Okay. And so did you use all hard money and, like, DSCR loans, or were you using private money as well? What was the main type of financing you
Hard
used?
money into DSCR was a big one I used for all those burr deals, and then leveraging creative finance. Closed a good handful doing seller finance and sub-2 deals.
What did that look like? Can you kind of explain that?
So the first thing I would kind of look for when I entered a property, talk to the homeowner, was like identifying the problem. Once I could identify the problem and what was all going on with the property or that specific person that owned it, then I could devise a strategy. So I almost look at all these different strategies as like tools in my tool belt, or maybe like a doctor diagnosing an illness, and they have all these different
Mm,
medicines that they can use. So I would kind of figure out what's going on, diagnose the issue, and then apply a strategy. So um, if they had like a little equity position and selling wasn't a realistic option for them, hey, maybe let's take on this deal sub two. Or if they owned it free and clear, maybe, hey, let's pitch a sub two package and see if we can get it closed. Or maybe do something hybrid where I could assume a mortgage that they had on it, and then if they needed to cover an equity difference, come in there with a second position as a seller finance deal. So
mm.
yeah, by kind of combining a bunch of different things, we were able to close a lot of deals that way in really creative ways.
Wow. And if those all worked out well, have you had any like issues from any of them, or problems with the seller afterwards or anything?
No issues yet. Knock on some wood. But I haven't had any issues yet, or any. I know people worry a lot about the due on sale clause,
Yeah.
but luckily I haven't had anything happen to me yet, anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had that same experience because I've done, where I've taken over buying properties subject to the existing financing, and everyone loves to bring up that due on sale clause. I have yet to meet somebody who that has been an issue for, or they've called the loan due that's being serviced. Now, again, if you stop paying, yeah, they're gonna
Oh yeah.
they're gonna start looking into why did they stop paying. But if a loan is being paid on time every month, then why would a lender call their loan due? It's being serviced. So, not to say that it can't happen. Anything can happen, but the likelihood, from what I've found and talking to a lot of other people, it's very small. So,
Yeah.
one thing I wanted to point out that you mentioned was the very first thing you do is figure out what the problem is, and that I think is key, because I think a lot of people, they have the question of, well, how do you get a property at a big discount? Like, why would somebody sell you their home at a discount to the market rate? And, what if they just don't have a problem? And the answer is, you probably shouldn't be talking to that person, right? I mean, my experience, 99% of homeowners you shouldn't be talking to. It's the 1% who you have to put yourself in their shoes and figure out, from their perspective, what is the big problem? Like, do they have a hoarder house that is just overwhelming them? They inherited a property across the country. All these issues that come up that it's well worth it to them to sell it at a discount if they can just be taken off their hands and they don't have to deal with this big problem that they have anymore. So figuring out what's fair for them and fair for you, I think, is the key, and that boils down to exactly what you said. It's that problem. So what do you feel like? I'm curious. Like, when you think about your journey to financial freedom, and you look back on the last 5 years, what was the most impactful steps you took, or the most impactful things that you did that kind of made the biggest difference?
Absolutely. Another little note I'll make on what you said too. Loving what you're
Sorry,
throwing
I'm
out.
not giving you time to talk.
Yeah, well, I love playing off of that. Is that a lot of folks, when they ask how are you getting such a discount or how are you getting such a good deal, I feel like they look at it through one lens, and it's so transactional. I feel like a lot of these deals that I've closed I've leveraged my relationship with them, I've leveraged that trust, our connection that we had to get those really good deals. So for those wholesalers out there, if you're just shooting off numbers at folks and you're not establishing a relationship, I think that's maybe the point of failure there. If you can establish a relationship, build trust, then you can go after those sweet, sweet deals and get those discounts and get those margins that you're looking for. Make it about the relationship.
Yeah, and you followed through on what you said you were going to do, too. It's not like you're just trying to get a lowball offer accepted so that you can, like, default and stop making their payments. So,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, so the most impactful things for me, I think that first Burr deal was a pivotal moment for me because a lot of things clicked after that first Burr deal. I did a ton more. I think almost my very first of everything, because I feel like to learn, you just have to go out there and do it, and it becomes wisdom after that. First sub two deal, when I assumed about 6 figures worth of equity, was huge for me too, because I was like, wow, I came into that deal, I only paid closing costs, there was no down payment, so it was probably like $1,000 I paid just to have my title company do some doc prep and transfer the deed. Paid $1,000, and I think it was like 115,000 or so ish worth of equity in that property. So that was a sweet deal.
Yeah.
Doing my first commercial deal was also another huge moment for me because I was walking this property. It was $1 million purchase price, 8-plex plus a single family house on adjacent lots. And I was like, hey, sir, I love this property and I'm going to buy it from you. Just a little a little fun fact though is I don't really have any money. So like, can you work with me to like, figure something out? So we did, and I had to get really creative with that deal, and it forced me to really think, all right, how am I gonna get this deal to closing? So I was able to have him carry a seller back note for most of the down payment. I collateralized equity in a rental property that I had, and I worked with just a commercial lender who was able to lend me, I think, at least like 80%, or maybe it was 75, I can't remember. Let's just say 80% of the loan. And so I had to work with each party, the seller, the lender, and of course myself to figure out how's everybody going to be satisfied with bringing these funds to closing. So I basically bought $1 million purchase with really no money down by collateralizing equity, carrying a note, and working with that local commercial lender. So closed
Wow.
that deal. It didn't have any. I literally had probably like 30 grand in my checking account at the time, and if I were to try to close that conventionally, I would have needed like at least 20% down, so about 200K plus closing costs. But I closed it with literally pretty much nothing in my bank and closed it by myself, no partners or anything. And then buying this house was another really fun moment too, because this was a seller finance deal. The house I live in now is $1 million purchase, and again, seller finance deal, and I have this house in at 3% interest.
Nice. So did you have to bring anything to the table, or it
Yeah,
was
this house
fully...
I did have to bring
Yeah.
money to the table, but I had a home equity loan on another property that I used
Okay.
to cover the down payment over here. But I couldn't
Wow.
say no to a 3% interest rate. Um,
Yeah.
and I structured it so when the loan is amortizing from day one, the first payment is equal installments of principal and interest. So I'm paying down more principal. And it's a waterfront property. You have a dock and a lift, everything for a boat. So it's
How
a
many
cool
years
place.
left on it?
So the note is a 5-year note but there's
Oh,
also an optional extension. So
okay.
I'm definitely gonna play nice and make the seller love me so that he'll
Yeah.
extend the loan maybe another 5 years or so. So I can keep pushing that can down the
Yeah.
road.
Yeah, 3%. I mean, the difference on $1 million payment between 3% and what they are mortgages today at 7% is, over $1,000 a month, I'm sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to afford to
So,
live here if it wasn't for
yeah.
such a creative deal.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wow. That is awesome. If that doesn't inspire you, what Taylor just talked about, especially the one that really excites me the most is the single family with the 8-plex side by side that you got for $1 million. Because if you break that down, I mean, really all Taylor did is he figured out what each party would want to see in terms of skin in the game to make them feel comfortable, and then just set that up. So the bank is given 80% of the purchase. Well, he's got to come up with the other 20. So he goes to the seller who wants to sell the property but doesn't want Taylor to default. So if Taylor puts in some collateral from another property to make the seller feel comfortable that he's got skin in the game, he's not just going to walk away and leave this property and, the guy's out his 20%, then everybody's satisfied and you didn't have to bring anything to the table. That's
Yes.
amazing.